my consciousness is currently sitting at a particular dimension, but my being exists in all dimensions. So when we talk about our higher self, that's a term that's commonly used, and we think of it as just a wiser version of ourselves. What we're really talking about is the part of us that's always part of us that can perceive more dimensions than we can, that can perceive more of reality than we can. I've seen so much information or so many videos and content talking about the 5D, talking about what it means to go to the 5D. And I want to share my downloads that I've received. And I want to talk to you about how it's impacted my ability to manifest, how it's impacted my day-to-day experience, and hopefully explain it in a way that makes it more practical and easy to apply to your everyday experience as a conscious creator. So in order to set the scene, we've got to take it all the way back to basic geometry. Most of us remember being taught in geometry about the X and Y axes, the Z axis, and that's about as far as we went, to the third dimension. I think because we're taught up to the third dimension in geometry, that's how we view ourselves as three-dimensional beings. But you'll see as I kind of talk through all of this and how it relates to our actual existence, how we're actually already 4D beings. When we talk about the 0 point, right, this is before you get into any of the dimensions, we're talking about dark matter. We're talking about the energy that holds all possibilities, right? We are all expressions of that energy. And when we talk about dimensions and what they are, it is us breaking down in a way that we can understand the different layers of this reality that has been created from all the potential that exists in dark matter. So the 0 point is that dark matter. It contains everything, and it is expansive, and it is small. It is all things. When we get to that x-axis, we start to stack that potentiality on itself to create a line, right? As part of the fabric of reality. So that's the first dimension, those points stacked on top of themselves, just along that single line. Then when we get to the second dimension, we can start stacking in different directions, right? It's not just straight up X and Y, but it's the ability to go from one line to stacking those points of potentiality anywhere we would like, but on a flat surface. That's the 2D, right? So when we add the 3D, we're adding that Z axis, and now we can stack these points of potentiality to create all the different shapes that exist in the 3D. The reason we're 4D beings is because we exist in the time-space continuum, or our consciousness is at that level, meaning we can perceive all the 3D objects moving through space over a period of time. Now, space-time exists so that we can perceive things in this way, right? It's part of our design of reality so that we can have these types of experience. So I can move this pen around so that I can write with it, so that I can mess with my hair, so that we can build things. So we're fourth dimensional because we can perceive things moving through space-time. Now, our perception, most of us, is limited at the 4D, meaning we're only perceiving, what we can move around. Now, those of us who use our imagination are already accessing the 5D, because what is the fifth dimension? The fifth dimension, so when you're looking at the fourth dimension, right? As we create the 3D objects and they're moving through space-time, we are moving through space-time as 3D objects. We are creating a timeline, right? All the things that I've done since I was born up to now is my past. And then I have a timeline ahead of me. This already exists, right? At the fifth dimension, we use our imagination and we remember things that happened in our past, and we remember things, or we can remember, that's a whole other video too, things that happened in our future. And that's how we create the rest of our timeline. So fifth dimensional existence just means that you have access to this timeline, and then you have the ability to imagine different outcomes, right? So when we talk about going to the 50, most of us are already there. We have evolved to that point as a collective consciousness, or we now have access to that. I won't say everyone has evolved to use their imagination, because some people choose not to, but we now as a collective have access to that. So when we talk about going to a dimension, what we're really talking about is making that collective choice to allow our consciousness access to another part of an already existing reality. So let's pause here before we talk about the sixth dimension. We are made up of all of the lower dimensions, right? I'm existing in 5D when I'm imagining, thinking about my past, thinking about my future. My consciousness is wandering around the 4D as I'm observing the 3D objects, as I'm observing the present moment. 3D, I'm made up of the 3D, which is made up of the 2D, which is made up of the 1D, which is constructed from all the 0 points. So I don't just exist at the fifth dimension. I exist at all the dimensions below. So if I extrapolate that, I also exist in all the dimensions above. My consciousness is currently sitting at a particular dimension, but my being exists in all dimensions. So when we talk about our higher self, that's a term that's commonly used, and we think of it as just a wiser version of ourselves. What we're really talking about is the part of us that's always part of us that can perceive more dimensions than we can, that can perceive more of reality than we can. So when we say things like, I go to my higher self for information, when you go to your higher self can perceive more dimensions than you can. Now, I haven't had the conversation with my higher self to figure out what level of consciousness my higher self is at. And really, when we say higher self, that's such a broad term. We could be accessing parts of ourselves at any higher dimension. But when we go beyond the 5D, so we talked about 0 point, first dimension, second dimension, third dimension, space-time, fourth dimension, fifth dimension, being able to take our consciousness to our past and to our future. The sixth dimension is the ability to combine different timelines. I have accessed the sixth dimension with my consciousness. I know that the door is now open because I've done it. So the way that I did that, the way that we can do that, is instead of just being able to imagine what has happened in the past and imagine a future and then take steps towards creating that part of the timeline or walking along that part of the timeline, we can actually modify. So remember, we talked about the third dimension. This object exists in the third dimension, but it can't move until it gets to the fourth dimension, space-time. These timelines all exist stacked infinitely in the fifth dimension, but we can't modify them or manipulate them until our consciousness, not consciously, until we're thinking at a sixth dimensional level. So my sixth dimension experience was creating a past event that allowed a future event to take place. When we get to that level, that's where we're talking about sixth dimensional consciousness. When we talk about the seventh and eighth dimensions, I have a whole spreadsheet breakdown. If you guys want me to dig deeper into, what it means for the consciousness to be aware of the seventh, eighth, ninth, and 10th dimensions, leave a comment below and let me know. But like I said, when we access our higher self, the higher self is aware of more of this than our current level of consciousness. We're not there yet. One day we will become our higher self. And that's why we should listen to those nudges that we get when our mind is clear, when we've connected to our higher self, because that part of us can see more and can give us a better idea of the next steps to take in order to land on a certain timeline in the future. Going to the fifth dimension sixth dimension as a collective consciousness means that we've decided collectively that it's time to access it, that we now have access to it as part of this experience. Like we're the avatar, we're playing this game, and now the doors have opened to a higher level. But people can choose not to use that access or take advantage of that access. It is a choose your adventure game. It's like when you turn on your TV now with these streaming channels, they have the choose your adventure. You push the button to say what the next step is. You are constantly creating new timelines. You are constantly making choices to direct your focus, your awareness at certain things to delve deeper into that experience. And that's why when it comes to manifesting, where we place our attention is so important, because attention is our vote for what's next on our timeline. I made another video yesterday talking about flipping around negative experiences. We have certain negative experiences to bring awareness to their opposite and to give us access to them. So it's important to remember that where we direct our attention is where we're telling our higher selves that we want to go. Be careful where you give your attention. Remember that you are not just this fourth dimensional being, that you are a being that exists on all dimensions, and that you have a lot of freedom in the timelines that you choose. Also be aware that not everyone wants to walk through those doors. So if you're feeling pulled to take more control over your experience and your reality, to create consciously, it's probably because you chose that. You, meaning all of you that exist on all these dimensions, you, the collective consciousness that decided to break out into this particular experience, you decided that that was something that you want to do. I know a lot of times when we get access to this information, we feel the need to shout it on the rooftops. But what I'm finding is that as I'm realizing that I'm able to access different levels of consciousness, I get quieter. And I appreciate everything as a sacred part of this experience. I try my best. Sometimes I get caught up in this 4D experience. Sometimes my consciousness drops back down into the 4D and I get judgmental. I look at what someone else is doing and say what they should be doing, but everyone is doing exactly what they should be doing. And my focus should always be on my own attention and where it's going, and whether or not I am exploring my inner world and looking at my outer world as a mirror. That should be my only job. And also deciding how I want to interact with the other aspects of the collective consciousness, with the other aspects of myself. Whether I want to dive into kindness, authenticity, or whether I want to dive into defensiveness and sadness. You know what I'm saying? None of it is wrong. All of it is my choice. But one of the things that's the most challenging to remember is that it is you that needs to be worried about your own journey. This video is to hopefully shed some light on what the 5D really is. It's not some new place. It's not some, I guess you could call it a heaven. You could call it an escape. But it's a level of reality that already exists.
Get daily motivational quotes, document your manifestation journey, and do all your scripting in the Create Your Life journal that you can get on Amazon.com. Link in bio and description.